Welcome to the Builder's Corner. I am Trunks, and today we'll be talking about the Animation Gizmo. Animation Gizmos give players the ability to bring their creations to life. They provide a more organic solution to movement in Rec Room without the need for an extensive understanding of circuits. If you know how to create with the Maker Pen, then you can learn how to animate. We are also going to talk about pivot points. If you want your animations to be successful, it will be important to understand what pivot points are and how they relate to movement in animation. So let's get started. Let's begin by pulling out our Maker Pen and clicking on the Open Palette button. Navigate to the Gadgets menu and then filter by Gizmos. Select the Animation Gizmo and spawn one in. On the top of the Animation Gizmo is our connection point. We use this point with the wire tool to add or remove objects from the animation. There are 3 input pins on the left side: play, stop, and reset. Sending any signal to the play pin will start the animation. Sending any signal to the stop pin will cause the animation to pause in place. Sending any signal to the reset pin will immediately bring our animation back to its starting frame. The done output pin will output a pulse of 1 when the animation has concluded. Using the configuration tool on the Animation Gizmo, we can adjust the settings in the palette menu. We have 2 modes of animation, loop and ping pong. We have a speed multiplier and toggles for stop at end and stop at start. You can use stop at end for both loop and ping pong modes, but stop at start only works when set to ping pong mode. It is good practice to only send pulsed and not constant signals to these inputs. Doing so could have undesired results. To begin animating, use the wire tool to add an object to the Animation Gizmo. A message will appear when this happens. Then use the Edit tool on the Animation Gizmo to go into edit mode. On the Maker Pen menu, we can now see the Animation User Interface. Each of these new buttons correspond with the keyframes that appear down below in the timeline. Insert adds a keyframe between 2 existing keyframes. We also have time input, in and out transitions, and a toggle for smooth movement, which we'll talk about in a moment. We'll click the Add button to add a keyframe to the timeline and use the Move tool to set a new position for the object. This line represents the path between the 2 keyframes. We can watch the path as the object moves. We will add a few more frames and try to return back to our starting position. Since we are on loop mode, we want our animation to appear seamless. To do this, we will use a method called wrapping. Wrapping is essentially copying the first keyframe and pasting it as the last. What this does is ensure that the last position at the end of the animation is the same as the first, making for a clean loop. With ping pong mode, the animation will play forwards through the timeline and then play in reverse. Utilizing stop at end and stop at start, we can easily create the animation of a functional door. Using Configure, we can adjust the speed multiplier so that it opens at a different rate. The true speed of an animation is defined by the space between the keyframes and not the multiplier in the settings menu. By changing the time of the keyframe, we can change how quickly one part of the animation happens to the next. When changing the time of a keyframe, all the keyframes in the timeline after it will adjust automatically. Let's talk about the in and out keyframe transitions, linear, ease, and ease fast. In this example, the animations are all the same, but their transitions are different. The top example has all its transitions set to linear. Its speed is constant between its frames. In defines the behavior when coming into a keyframe, and out defines the behavior when moving out of a keyframe. The middle example has out set to ease on the first keyframe. Keyframe 2 has in set to ease. You can see it accelerate at the beginning and decelerate at the end. The bottom example has transition set to ease fast, similar to ease above it, but noticeably faster. These settings are useful for implying physical inertia in an animation. It gives the impression that these are real physical things moving around that are subjected to the same forces of nature other things are. The smooth movement option gives a more refined path curve to the transition between keyframes. As you can see here, we have an octagonal path, but as we go through, we're going to add smooth movement to it, and you can see the path curve start to change as we do it. Once we've added it to all, we will see our previous octagonal path change into a nice circular path. This is what a pivot point looks like. To talk about pivot points, we must first make sure that we can see them. Open your palette and navigate to the Settings tab. Find the option that says Show Pivots. Make sure it is toggled on with a check mark. All object groups contain one pivot point. In Maker Pen objects, it is created after you have stopped drawing the very first shape. In animation, the position of the shapes relative to the pivot point is very important. This is a reference point for all movement and rotation done by the Animation Gizmo. If the shapes are not aligned properly with the pivot point, the shapes will not move as expected when animated. Seeing very large visible curves in the keyframe path usually means an issue with the pivot point. By going into edit mode on the shapes, the pivot should become visible. Using the select tool, select all the shapes and move them so that the pivot point is in the center of them. For most simple uses, this position is good enough for animation, and it's good practice to always keep your pivot point in mind when creating. Sometimes we need to think of the pivot point like a hinge joint, like on a door or an arm. So we position the shape so that the pivot point is at the hinge. We checked our pivot points and they are all correct. We can go back into edit mode on the Animation Gizmo. Currently, if we use the rotate tool on an object, it will rotate around the assumed center of all the shapes in its container. It would be very useful if this tool rotated around the pivot point while editing an animation, but perhaps we can look forward to that in the future. For now, we will turn off snapping and allow our shapes to rotate while moving so we can easily move our objects into position. Since the pivot points are in the correct position, you could see that our animation looks the way we want it to look. In order to change the pivot point, we first must know where it is. Sometimes that is a problem because it could be very far away from our shapes. Luckily, there is an easy solution to that issue by merging two like objects together. We draw a 10 centimeter cube and position the shape so that the pivot is in the center. Then we check both objects to make sure they have the same physical configuration settings. Using the Select tool, we select the 10 centimeter cube first and the other object next. Click the context menu and merge the shapes together. Using the Edit tool, edit the merged shape and confirm that the pivot point is now where you want it. Then delete the dummy cube and exit edit mode. Maker Pen objects are not the only thing that can be animated. You can also animate props and other animation gizmos. We can take advantage of this by using a second animation gizmo to create a path for our animation. While animating a simple looping path for our animation, we're going to utilize the wrapping method of copying the first keyframe to the last keyframe to get a nice clean loop. It is also possible to control one object with multiple animation gizmos. You can utilize the Done output pin to play the next animation gizmo in a series. But it is important to only have one playing at a time, because the results can be unpredictable. One of the great things about the animation gizmo compared to other gadgets is how little it costs in ink. It can also stand in for several other gadgets because of how it functions. We can use it like a clamp, like an object respawner, or just in place of pistons or rotators. I hope you've enjoyed our video here today. If we got something wrong or you have a better understanding of these concepts, please leave us a comment down below. We will have this drinky bird available for you in the Invention Store. See you next time in the Builder's Corner.